The first message arrived with the morning dew. Crimson script on brittle parchment, promising ruin. Then came the whispers, the unnatural quiet, the shadows that lengthened even at noon. Oakhaven was dying piece by piece, claimed by the black crows and the blood they left behind. What did they want? And who would be next? Elara's tires crunched on the gravel road leading into Oakhaven, the sound a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that clung to the small town like the morning fog. It had been 10 years since she'd left, seeking the anonymity of the city, leaving behind the suffocating familiarity of her childhood home. Now her grandmother Evelyn was gone, and Elara had returned to tie up loose ends, to sell the old house, and perhaps to finally sever the last threads connecting her to this isolated pocket of the world. Oakhaven hadn't changed much, at least not on the surface. The same faded storefronts lined Main Street, the same ancient oak trees shadowed the town square, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards the perpetually gray sky. Yet, as Elara drove past, she felt an unfamiliar chill, a subtle shift in the air, as if the very breath of the town had grown shallower. Sheriff Brody was the first person she encountered. He was still the same solid, stoic figure, though streaks of gray now peppered his temples. He found her on the porch of her grandmother's house, wrestling with a stubborn lock. "Elara Vance, didn't think you'd be back so soon," he drawled, his voice carrying the slow rhythm of the town. "Heard about Evelyn. My condolences." "Thank you, Sheriff," Elara replied, finally getting the key to turn. "Just here to sort things out. Sell the place." Brody nodded, but his gaze was distant, troubled. "Town's been quiet. Too quiet." He paused, then sighed. "We had a bit of a situation last week. Old man Hemlock found a note on his porch." "A note?" Elara prompted, pushing the heavy oak door open to reveal the scent of dust and forgotten lavender. "Written in, well, a dark red substance. Looked like blood. Said something cryptic about Oakhaven's blight and the reckoning of the Black Crows. Thought it was a sick prank, maybe some kids." Brody rubbed the back of his neck. "But then the field behind the old mill just dropped. A sinkhole, overnight. Nobody hurt, thankfully, but it was big, unnaturally big." Elara shivered. A sinkhole was rare in Oakhaven's rocky terrain. "And the Black Crows?" Brody shrugged, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Just an old legend, mostly. Kids used to tell stories about them, spirits of the wronged coming for judgment. Bunch of hogwash, probably. Still, gives you pause." Dismissing it as local superstition, Elara spent the next few days sifting through Evelyn's belongings. Her grandmother had been a meticulous hoarder of memories. Old photographs, pressed flowers, and countless journals, their leather covers softened with age. It was in one of these journals, a small, unassuming one from the 1950s, that Elara found her first real disquiet. Evelyn had meticulously drawn detailed pictures of crows, not just ordinary birds, but stylized, almost menacing figures. Beneath one, in her neat looping script, Evelyn had written, "They watch. Always. The Crowfeather folk remember." A week after Elara's arrival, the whispers grew louder. The second message appeared, this time tacked to the door of the general store, bolder and more chilling than the first. It read, "The first stone crumbles. Soon, the walls will fall. The Black Crows demand their due. The innocent's blood still stains the earth." It was indeed written in blood, a dried brownish red that flaked at the edges. This time, it wasn't just a sinkhole. A sudden, violent hailstorm descended upon Oakhaven, out of season and out of nowhere. It lasted only an hour, but the hail was the size of golf balls, shattering windows, denting roofs, and inexplicably only hitting the north side of town. The houses on the south, including Elara's grandmother's, remained untouched, bathed in an eerie calm. That evening, Sheriff Brody called. His voice was strained, no longer merely troubled but deeply shaken. "Elara, it's old man Hemlock. He's gone." Elara felt a sudden lurch in her stomach. Gone? Did he leave? No, he was found in his cabin, dead. Brody paused, struggling for words. No signs of a struggle, no wounds, but he looked ancient, like he'd aged 50 years overnight. And his cabin, the walls were covered in those symbols, crows, drawn in, that same red stuff. A cold dread seeped into Elara's bones. This was no prank. This was no coincidence. The town plunged into a collective fear. People locked their doors, pulled their curtains tight. Whispers of the black crows turned into frantic pronouncements of a curse. Old Silas, the town's oldest resident and a repository of local folklore, began holding forth at the diner, his voice raspy. "I told you, they're here. The crow feather folk. They protect the old ways, the forgotten places. Oakhaven, she ain't always been Oakhaven. There was a time, a long time ago. Before these houses, before these roads." Silas's eyes, milky with age, held a chilling clarity. "They took it, the land, and they paid in blood. Now the earth remembers." Elara felt compelled to investigate. Her grandmother's journals became her guide. Evelyn had been an amateur historian, meticulously documenting Oakhaven's past. Elara spent hours poring over the brittle pages, cross-referencing names and dates. Her grandmother had a particular fascination with the town's founding. She'd hinted at a dark secret, a missing chapter in the town's official history. The next message appeared on the tombstone of the town's first mayor, Jasper Thorne, in the old cemetery. "The blood of the innocent cries from the earth. The heirs of the liars will suffer." It was a direct threat, chillingly specific. The second natural disaster followed swiftly. A portion of the town square directly in front of the old library began to sink. Not a sinkhole, but a slow, deliberate subsidence, threatening to swallow the historic building. The library, established by the Thorne family, was a symbol of Oakhaven's pride. And then, the second murder. Sarah Thorne, the last living descendant of Jasper Thorne, a gentle, elderly woman who had run the local bakery for 40 years. She was found in her home, exactly as Hemlock had been, withered, devoid of life, a crow symbol smeared on her kitchen wall. Her body, like Hemlock's, bore no physical trauma, but the life force seemed to have been utterly drained from her. Elara found Sheriff Brody at the crime scene, his face ashen. This is beyond anything, Elara. We've got no leads, no forced entry, no struggle. And who would do this to Sarah? She was harmless." "It's the curse, isn't it, Sheriff?" Elara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The black crows." Brody ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I'm seeing patterns. Hemlock, Sarah, both from old Oakhaven families, both dismissed the warnings." He looked at Elara, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "You've been digging through Evelyn's things? What have you found? Your grandmother, she always had a knack for the town's deeper currents." Elara showed him Evelyn's journals, pointing to the stylized crow drawings, the cryptic notes. She wrote about the crow feather folk, and she was obsessed with the town's founding, often hinting at a suppressed truth. Together, they delved into the dusty archives of the old library, carefully retrieved from the sinking building. Elara, with her grandmother's clues, pieced together a horrifying narrative. Oakhaven wasn't the original name of the settlement. Centuries ago, before the arrival of the European settlers, the land had been sacred to a small indigenous tribe known as the Quetali, the Crow people. They were peaceful, spiritual, and believed the land to be imbued with ancestral spirits, often symbolized by the ever-present black crows. When Jasper Thorne and his cohort arrived, they saw only untouched wilderness, ripe for development. They drove the Quetali from their ancestral grounds, brutally massacring those who resisted and burning their sacred sites. The official town history conveniently omitted this dark chapter, referring only to unforeseen challenges and unclaimed lands. Evelyn's journals detailed how the Quetali elders, in their dying breaths, had laid a powerful curse upon the land and those who defiled it. A curse of judgment, to be carried out by the spirits of the Crow people, the Black Crows, until their blood was avenged and their story acknowledged. The messages, written in blood, were not mere threats. They were pronouncements from the land itself, reminders of the injustice, precursors to the reckoning. And the blood, Elara realized with a chilling jolt, wasn't necessarily fresh. It could be ancient, seeped from the very earth where the Quetali had fallen. The victims, Hemlock and Sarah Thorne, were not just old families. Their ancestors were direct perpetrators of the massacre. Their dismissiveness of the curse had not been out of ignorance, but out of a deep-seated fear and complicity passed down through generations. As this truth dawned upon Elara and Brody, a new message appeared. This one, etched onto the very stone of the town's war memorial, read, "The time of forgetting is over. The harvest is ripe. On the longest night, Oakhaven will return to the earth." The longest night was 3 days away. Panic in Oakhaven reached a fever pitch. Roads out of town were choked with desperate residents. But just as quickly as the exodus began, it stopped. A dense, unnatural fog rolled in, thick and impenetrable, cloaking the entire town, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. And with the fog came the crows, thousands of them. Their cacophony was deafening, a relentless, mournful call that echoed through the misty air, an auditory manifestation of dread. Elara and Brody, now allied, knew they had to act. But what could they do against a centuries-old curse? They pored over Evelyn's final cryptic notes. Her last entry spoke of atonement, of speaking the truth to the bones of the land, and of a place of crossing where earth meets sky. Elara remembered an old, overgrown area on the edge of town, marked on Evelyn's hand-drawn maps as the Crow's Roost, the highest point in Oakhaven, long abandoned and rumored to be haunted. It was here, Elara suspected, that the Quetali had made their final stand, and where their sacred ground had been desecrated. Under the oppressive blanket of fog and the terrifying chorus of crows, Elara and Brody made their way to the Roost. The air grew colder with every step, and the ground felt strangely soft, almost spongy beneath their feet. They could hear the town groaning around them, the distant sounds of splintering wood and collapsing stone, the land reclaiming its own. At the summit, a crude ancient stone altar, half buried in the earth, emerged from the mist. It was covered in moss and lichen, but Elara recognized the faint, etched symbols of the Crow people. Beside it, a fresh, almost glowing patch of ground. "This is it," Elara whispered, a chill running down her spine. "The place of crossing." Suddenly, the crow calls intensified, reaching an unbearable crescendo. The fog swirled around them, coalescing into shadowy forms at the periphery of their vision, tall and gaunt, their outlines subtly shifting, reminiscent of feathers and wings. The temperature plummeted. Brody drew his sidearm, but his hand trembled. "What are they? What do they want?" "They want the truth," Elara replied, her voice filled with a desperate conviction. "They want their story to be heard, to be remembered." She remembered Evelyn's words. "Speak the truth to the bones of the land." Elara, trembling, began to speak, her voice amplified by the unnatural silence that momentarily fell upon the Roost. She recounted the history she had unearthed, the massacre of the Quetali, the injustice, the intentional erasure of their past. She spoke of the founders' greed, of the town's complicity in forgetting. She did not spare her own family, acknowledging their ancestors' role in the silence. She spoke of the Black Crows not as a legend, but as the enduring spirit of the wronged, demanding justice from the very soil of Oakhaven. As Elara spoke, the shadows around them seemed to writhe, but they did not approach. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, softly at first, then growing in intensity. Cracks appeared in the earth, radiating outwards from the altar. The air filled with the smell of damp earth and something else, something ancient and metallic, like dried blood. Then, with a final heart-stopping tremor, the ground beneath the altar gave way. It wasn't a destructive collapse, but a gentle, almost reverent sinking. As the earth settled, a faint, ethereal glow emanated from the newly opened chasm. The sound of the crows, which had paused during Elara's confession, returned, but this time it was different. Less menacing, more like a mournful lament, a release. The shadowy figures in the fog did not disappear, but they softened, their outlines less defined, their presence less threatening. The overwhelming cold began to recede. The longest night passed in a terrifying blur. When dawn finally broke, the fog had dissipated, leaving behind a scarred and changed Oakhaven. Several buildings had collapsed, swallowed by the earth or ravaged by the unearthly storm. The town square was a gaping wound, the library reduced to rubble. Many homes stood empty, their residents having fled or vanished in the night. The crow calls had stopped. The unnerving silence returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now, weighted with loss and an undeniable collective trauma. Elara and Brody stood at the crow's roost, looking down at the broken town. The faint glow from the altar site was gone, but the earth there felt different, calmer. "Did it work?" Brody whispered, his voice hoarse. Elara didn't know. The messages had stopped. The immediate devastation seemed to have ceased. But Oakhaven was a ghost of its former self. The survivors, few and shell-shocked, moved about like specters, their eyes haunted, forever marked by the terror they had witnessed and the truth they had been forced to confront. Elara left Oakhaven a few weeks later. The house stood, but she felt no desire to stay. The weight of Oakhaven's history, of the crow-feather folk and their unending vigil, had settled deep within her. As her car pulled away, leaving the broken town behind, she glanced in her rearview mirror. Perched on a telephone wire, silhouetted against the morning sun, was a single black crow watching her. It neither moved nor cawed. It simply watched, an eternal sentinel, a chilling reminder that some truths, once unearthed, can never truly be buried again. The curse might be dormant, but the memory, like a fresh stain on old earth, would forever remain.